Thank you very much for the introduction, Arthur. Welcome to my presentation on Malleable Encryption goes Awry. This is joint work with Matilda, Backendal, and Kenneth Paterson that we did at ETH Zurich. Mega is a cloud storage provider that has over 280 million users, storing more than 140 billion files. But unlike Dropbox and other big cloud providers, they claim to offer fully user-controlled end-to-end encryption. On their website, they emphasize this with statements like Mega does not have access to your password or your data. So consequently, we're going to look at a threat model here where the cloud storage provider can act fully malicious and might spy on user data or try to tamper with it. Note that this also includes the case where a third party compromises Mega and then runs the attacks from their infrastructure. So in this talk, we're going to discuss 5 attacks that allow a malicious cloud provider to break authentication and compromise file confidentiality and integrity. But before jumping into the attacks, we're going to briefly discuss a simplified version of Mega's cryptographic design. So in our system, if a user wants to upload a file, they will first log into Mega and then generate for a file a new file key and encrypt the file with that key and upload the encrypted file to the cloud storage. But they're also going to use their password to encrypt the file key itself and upload this key to Mega as well to make it accessible on other devices. So for instance, if the user wants to download their file on their mobile phone, they will authenticate to the server again, fetch the encrypted file, fetch the encrypted file key, and then use their knowledge of the password to decrypt the file key and use that key to decrypt the file. We're also quickly going to discuss authentication because that's going to be crucial for our attacks. So during registration, a user generates an RSA key pair and then uploads the RSA public key to the server in plain text. The user also picks a password and then uses this password to encrypt the RSA-CRT key and upload this to the server as well. This key pair is afterwards used in a challenge response protocol for authentication. So to authenticate, the user will send an authentication request to the server, fetch the encrypted RSA-CRT key, and in addition to that, the server will encrypt a challenge to the RSA public key of the user that tries to authenticate. And so the user will use their password to decrypt the RSA-CRT key and then use that key to recover the challenge. And to conclude authentication, the user will then send back, this is something is happening on my screen here. The user will then decrypt this challenge and send this decrypted challenge back to the server to prove that it successfully recovered access to the RSA key material. So in conclusion, the password protects 2 different types of keys. First, the RSA-CRT key that's used for authentication, and second, a file key that's used for file encryption. With that background, we're now ready to get into the fun part and discuss our first attack that allows a malicious cloud provider to recover the RSA-CRT key of a user. This attack is going to exploit the authentication protocol. And in this protocol, the RSA-CRT key that's outsourced to the server is encrypted with AES-ECB, which is clearly a red flag. However, it's actually not trivial to build a key recovery attack just from the fact that they're using AES-ECB. So if you think about encrypting the picture of a Linux penguin with AES-ECB, then the same blocks of pixels map to the same color in the ciphertext because AES-ECB is deterministic. However, our RSA-CRT key is not a penguin. So if you, this secret key has high entropy, so if you split it into different blocks, those blocks are different from each other with overwhelming probability. So the problem here is really not that AES-ECB is deterministic, but instead those plaintext blocks are encrypted independent of each other and without any integrity protection. So really the problem is that AES-ECB is malleable, which means that the server can tamper with one of the ciphertext blocks, and then during decryption this will propagate and change one of the plaintext blocks without affecting the rest of the plaintext. Now, to see how we can use this to build a key recovery attack, we need to know how Mega stores their RSA-CRT key. They're using the following format. They first store primes P and Q that are the prime factors of the modulus n. Then they store the secret exponent D as well as a value U that will be useful for decryption. Now, keep in mind that this key is then split into different blocks, and those are encrypted with AES. For decryption, they use something called RSA-CRT, which takes a ciphertext C and decrypts it modulo P and modulo Q, and then combines these 2 values with the Chinese remainder theorem to recover the plaintext. From this plaintext, the client strips away some padding and then sends back the recovered challenge in the challenge response protocol for authentication to the server. So if the server tampers with the U value in the RSA-CRT key ciphertext, then the following happens. In general, this kind of randomizes the plaintext that the client recovers. So that doesn't seem to be very useful at first. But the adversary also controls the challenge that's sent to the client. So it turns out that if the adversary chooses to encrypt a challenge that is smaller than both primes P and Q, then actually the decryption modulo P and modulo Q still succeeds because this value is so small. And this results in the T value in the CRT computation to be 0, which masks away the garbled U value from the RSA-CRT key ciphertext. So that means the decryption is still successful despite that the adversary has tampered with the RSA-CRT key ciphertext. But now at this point, the recovered message is so small that the challenge itself actually vanishes in the padding that the client strips away, and so the client just sends a 0-bit string back to the server. But the malicious cloud provider can now use this to build a binary search for the RSA-CRT key primes of the victim by first tampering with the RSA-CRT key ciphertext and then making a guess for the primes P and Q and send this as a challenge to the client. If this guess was smaller than both primes, then as we just discussed, the client will send back a 0 to the server in the authentication protocol, and otherwise it will send back a random string so the adversary can recover the RSA-CRT key in 512 login attempts when we combine this with a standard lattice-based attack. This was later improved significantly down to 6 login attempts with a much fancier lattice attack, and then again re-improved to 2 login attempts by exploiting an additional attack vector. So in summary, the adversary can now compromise the authentication of a user, but just knowing the RSA-CRT key does not allow the adversary to read files of the user. But we can actually build a second attack on top of our first attack that allows file decryption. The main observation for this attack is that Mega also uses AES-ECB to encrypt file keys, and they're even using the same key as they use for the RSA-CRT key encryption. So the basic idea for this attack is that we're cut and pasting file key ciphertext blocks into the RSA-CRT key ciphertext, and then again use the vulnerable authentication protocol to decrypt those file keys. So in more detail, we are again going to target the authentication protocol, but this time the adversary is going to insert file key ciphertext blocks into the RSA-CRT key ciphertext. And the goal of the adversary is now to recover this modified value U prime and read out the decrypted file keys from there. And we're going to do this under the assumption that the adversary already knows the rest of the RSA-CRT key from running our first attack. But recall that changing this U value just randomizes the plaintext that the client recovers. So we need to be a bit more clever to make this attack work. And it turns out that if the adversary chooses to select the challenge as U times Q, then actually the RSA-CRT decryption equations simplify a lot. Because in that case, the decryption modulo P is 1 because U is the inverse of Q modulo P. And the decryption modulo Q is 0 because the message is simply a multiple of Q. And so in that case, this propagates, and with very high probability, the client will recover a message M that is U prime times Q over the integers. So if the adversary learns this message, it can just divide it by Q and then recover U prime and read out the file keys from that. Now in practice, it's a bit more complicated because the adversary only gets part of this decrypted message, but the attack still works with a combination of brute forcing and approximate division. So in summary, the adversary can cut and paste file key ciphertext blocks into the RSA-CRT key ciphertext and use this to recover 1 file key per login attempt. And this allows the adversary to read any user files. But in addition to reading existing files, our next 2 attacks allow an adversary to also upload new files to the cloud of a user. And this is possible because of the way how Mega designed their file encryption. So what they're doing is they're encrypting files with AES-CTR and then performing a CBC MAC on top of the file. And the thing that we call file key is the concatenation of the nonce and the message authentication code together with the XOR of those 2 values with the AES key K. Now, if you're confused at this point, this is maybe because this is indeed a very strange construction, and we're going to attack this one. So keep in mind that those file keys are encrypted with AES. So in this case, with 2 blocks of AES, so you split them into 2 blocks and then encrypt those blocks with AES. So one thing that we noticed right away is that the adversary can repeat the same ciphertext block twice, and then since AES-ECB is deterministic, this will decrypt to the same plaintext blocks, and those will cancel out when you XOR them. So the key that's used for AES encryption in that case is the all 0-bit string. The adversary still needs to know one plaintext ciphertext pair to pass the authentication check for a file. But now using a key that's all zeros is kind of a bit suspicious and very easy to detect. So our fourth attack improves on this by using our second attack to decrypt arbitrary ciphertext blocks, and then with that obtain keys that are not distinguishable from the ones a normal client would use. So to summarize, we found 5 attacks where our first attack showed that a malicious cloud provider can recover the RSA secret key of a user by exploiting that Mega does not use authenticated encryption for securing the outsourced key material. Then our second attack allows an adversary to exploit the missing key separation to recover user file keys. Then we have 2 more attacks that iterate that rolling your own crypto is dangerous. And interestingly, this was also a major challenge for mitigation because it turned out that if you want to change the file encryption, then this would have required more than half a year to re-encrypt all the existing files in their system, which is clearly infeasible. Now, our fifth attack that we didn't have time to discuss today is a bit more theoretic, but nonetheless a very exciting new variant of the RSA padding oracle that uses a purge strategy to adapt this common attack to Mega's custom padding scheme. Now, interestingly, Mega was aware that this part of their code is not ideal, but they were not able to move away from it for backwards compatibility reasons. So more generally, we conclude from this project that today we somewhat paradoxically trust untrusted cloud providers with the challenging task to design a secure end-to-end encrypted cloud storage system. So for the future, we propose to instead make a standardization effort that involves various stakeholders from industry and academia to design a well-analyzed and practical end-to-end encrypted cloud storage system. With that, I conclude my talk, and I wish you an amazing conference, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Miro, for the great talk. Any questions? There is a mic there, so run for it, please. We don't have much time, only a few minutes. While people are thinking about their question, maybe one quick question, if I may, right, is how would you have tackled this if you had to, sort of knowing what you know now, what would you have plugged in to make many of these problems go away?
So actually, in our paper, we made sort of 3 suggestions on how they could fix their system. One of them was sort of feasible to do right now, and one of them would be the last one would be a more complete overhaul of their design. So, for example, one clear thing that you should do is use authenticated encryption also for the key material. So they thought about it for the files, but they forgot about it for the key material. That would be one of the crucial points. And then stop reusing keys everywhere. They use the same key, for example, to compute the AES-CTR and also to compute the CBC MAC, and they use the same key to encrypt the RSA secret key and also all the file keys. So you would definitely need to domain separate those. I think that those would be 2 good starting points.
Cool, thanks. In the meantime, we have a question. Go for it.
So does Mega also have an offline password attack? I couldn't tell from the thing, but if you were able to recover basically the encryption of one of the keys, essentially, couldn't you do an offline password attack on that as well? Yes,
so Mega themselves can run an offline password attack based on the material that's exchanged in the authentication protocol. They could also just trial decrypt any file, make a guess for the password, simulate the authentication protocol themselves, and then see whether the file makes sense that comes out, whether it's a PDF or so. A third party cannot do the password guessing attack, no, because you don't get encrypted files and you don't get to see the authentication protocol.
We have time for one very short question and short answer.
Hello, nice talk. It sounds like most of the attacks coming from an unfortunate choice of the encryption scheme. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible to run any sort of formal analysis on top of the protocol just to verify if this protocol contains such gadget or no?
Yeah, so I think some of it is, some of the vulnerabilities are based on the choice of encryption schemes, but some of the others are standard encryption schemes, and it's just their combination that makes them vulnerable. So I think at that point, formal verification could be useful. Yes. But also their overall design is very complex, so I would expect this to be a challenging task.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for the great questions. In the end